to our conference, still online. As you remember, the last panel will be on site, partly with the on-site audience as well, which will start at 5 p.m. here at the Central European University. But before that, we have two panels, and the actual panel will be about detecting and countering disinformation and manipulation techniques, with special focus on Russian techniques in Central and Eastern Europe. And we shall have four distinguished panelists. Let me introduce all of them. First of all, let me introduce Peter Krakow, who is the director of Political Capital Institute here in Budapest, as well as associate professor of ELTE University. And remotely will join us, I hope all of them are here with us, Ana Mocanu, who is the executive director of Funky Citizens. This is a Romanian foundation. And Jan Ivancic, who is the legal counsel of Transparency International Slovakia, as well as Duncan Allen, who is the Digital Democracy Research Officer of Democratic Reporting International. And my name is József Péter Martin. For those who join now to our conference, I am Executive Director of Transparency International Hungary, and also the moderator of the current panel. So as I have just mentioned, we will speak and elaborate on the detection and countering disinformation and manipulation techniques. I think a topic which is very, very timely currently. The Russian techniques are present, unfortunately, in all of the countries from where we have distinguished participants of the current panel, in Hungary, in Romania, as well as in Slovakia. So my first question to the panelists is that what do you think are the one or two main tactics in your countries for election manipulation? So what are these techniques? Let's keep the Russian case afterwards, although obviously you can bring into this as well, but focus on the nature of the types of these kind of techniques. So whether it is let's say a third party who is carrying out de facto political campaigns, or fake online profiles, or smear campaigns against the candidates, or something other which is, for example, linked to the blurring line between the state and party financing. So what of these techniques, or something else, gerrymandering can be another techniques like this, what of these techniques you think is the most important in your countries and most widely used by autocrats and populists? So I don't know who would like to start. I think Peter.
Okay, I will be very brief. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the opportunity to discuss this important and indeed more than timely topic today. So in Hungary, I think the most important tool that has been developed in the last 16 years was highly centralized state-sponsored disinformation, and if we could mention other tools as well. We have seen fake parties. Vote buying is also a practice that, according to many research, have happened in Hungary. TI have also done something on that, some together with political capital, and there are plenty of other small tricks, but if I should name one trick, it would definitely be state-sponsored disinformation. And I think the specialty of the Hungarian model in state-sponsored disinformation is that how effective it has been despite its total lack of sophistication. So this is a kind of carpet bombing, political propaganda model, pretty much 20th century style, one message coming through every possible channels, the quantity matters and not the quality, and the list goes on. And right now, I think we just face a huge stress test of this so far highly efficient tool, because it seems at the moment that the government, I mean the pro-governmental disinformation machinery that has been operated with very high level of success seem to be less efficient at the moment in terms of manufacturing public opinion.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that. So in Hungary, according to Peter Kreko, the most important tool is the state-sponsored disinformation propaganda, which is extremely, extremely blunt. So what about the other countries of the region? What about Romania and what about Slovakia? Who would like to continue?
I think
Anna,
yeah, of course. First of all, thank you too for the invitation. I think the Romanian case, and here I would like to include also the Republic of Moldova. As at Funky Citizens, we monitored over 8 rounds of elections in the last 2 years. So we were at the front line of how these tactics evolved in time. And I will say that Romania serves as a testing laboratory for the modern manipulation tactics that we have, not only on the region, but across the globe as well. So, of course, most of you, probably all of you, are familiar with the situation from 2024 with Călin Georgescu coming in the front line of the presidential elections. But with the coming of Călin Georgescu, we are quite concerned about a new model of disinformation, and that is centered around coordinated inauthentical behavior. So we're speaking about the use of fake online profiles that emerge on the social media platforms and spread false information, but not only. When we're talking about the situation that we had 2 years ago, 1 year and a half actually, on the presidential elections, we have some concrete numbers. We have over 30,000 coordinated accounts that promoted Călin Georgescu. But I think it's important that to name the strategy from behind. So none of those accounts or none of those coordinated pages that we're seeing right now in Romania, especially on the electoral landscapes, are not naming specifically a candidate. So when it comes to the Romanian context, of course, you have propaganda. Of course, you have the channeling of political messages coming directly from the candidates. But the main strategy here is to float the informational space with a lot of content that is mainly on clickbait, that is mainly on sensitive situation in Romania, such as the son of the prime minister dying in a car accident, that are fueling the emotional sense of the voters, and then trying very subtly to promote the candidates. When we talked about the Georgescu case, all the campaign that was fueled by 1 million euros, as you know from official investigations, were not promoting him with his name. So we're talking about hashtags, we're talking about the promotion of peace and prosperity in Romania. And I think this is very important to mention, because myself as a social media analyst, it's very hard for me as well to conduct a report in which I'm saying and stating clearly that this campaign is specifically about this candidate. So what we saw in 2024, of course, it was just the beginning. After that, we also had the parliamentary elections in the Republic of Moldova. We also had the rerun of presidential elections in Romania. And what we saw there was just a rise and repeat strategy. So instead of learning of what happened on canceling elections in a European country, what the candidates understood from this and the disinformation actors, that those tactics are actually working, and it's the case to repeat them because they're working. Without social media monitoring, without algorithm moderation, of course, these tactics can continue to happen. And it's not only about the elections. Right now, we passed thankfully, the stage of elections, but we're seeing right now on every sensitive situation that has the potential to polarize the society, those coordinated pages, those fake online profiles, influencer networks, I don't know, pages with no disclosed ownership are continuously conducting campaigns that are basically preparing the moment for the next elections.
Thank you very much. What about Slovakia? Jan. You are muted, Jan, so please unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, now it's fine.
Perfect. So thank you very much also for the invitation and the possibility to be here. It's a great pleasure. Well, in Slovakia, the situation is just like that. It was mentioned before that it's not just only one tool, but it's a combination of several tools. So if I should pick just one of them, from my perspective, it would be the decreasing trust towards what we call mainstream media, and afterwards occurrence of so-called alternative media, which are really successful in Slovakia, and their support by the politicians. For instance, in Slovakia, it's rather interesting to look at the situation from the media perspective in last 3 or 4 years, that current coalition members communicate mostly with the alternative media, and they also have some restriction practice towards mainstream media. So this means that they can communicate their narratives through pages where hundreds of thousands or even millions of people attend them daily, but they do not have any opponent who would, discuss with them anything, because in these alternative media there is no media standard, so therefore they can just spread what they want through these channels, and there are plenty of people that believe that these alternative media are much better than mainstream media because it's communicated to them on a daily basis. So from my perspective, this is really a huge problem, and also we will speak about that a bit later, but we also have proof that that there is a Russian influence also on this type of media. So this is first thing. TI Slovakia has conducted the research 1 year or so before, and we have combined 10 topics, and we have focused on highly polarizing themes, and we have looked through mainstream media, and we have looked through alternative media. What was the information practice in both of them? And we could see that for instance, in alternative media, we found out some problems also in mainstream media that must be said and outlined. But on the other hand, in the alternative media world, the problem was much higher, because we could see that, for instance, we had a highly influential case of murder of one of investigative journalists, Jan Kuciak, in Slovakia, which is, I would say, world known. And we looked at this case from the perspective of alternative media, and you could see that there was only place, or there was only floor for the politicians of current coalition, saying that it was the problem that was caused by media, that was caused by opposition parties, it was caused by the hate speech pronounced by them, and so on and so on. So if you it was the only analysis of this kind that we have done, and you could see that if you look at the concrete cases from the different angle, from the different perspective of different media types, you can see a totally different information outcome.
Very interesting. Just one follow-up question for clarification. You made very strong distinction between the mainstream media, or I don't know how you put it, or traditional media and alternative media. So what's the main difference between the two? So why alternative media is an alternative media? What's the what are the features of it?
Yeah, we can say that the alternative media is what the denomination that they give themselves. We would in most cases call them disinformation media. What's the main difference is that the mainstream media has their structure. They have their board, etc., etc. So they are registered within the law, and we have also transparency law concerning the register of public sector partners. So they must disclose who owns them, who is behind them, who is the beneficial owner in case of mainstream media. So there is a plenty of regulation. On the other hand, these so-called alternative media are mostly some NGOs with hidden structure, or as hidden as possible, and they have just one web page, which is they say that it's information portal and not the media in a sense that they should be regulated. So in this sense, you can see double standard from their own position, that they call themselves that we are media, we are so-called alternative media, but on the other side, the regulation which covers media should not apply to us because we are citizens and we are doing so-called I don't know how to put that, civic information or something like that.
Thank you. Duncan, you have an overview, I believe, to the Central and Eastern Europe and to this kind of techniques in this region. So what could you add to what was said according to you in these countries, not only those whose representatives are here, but more in general in the region? What are these main tactics to manipulate elections?
Absolutely. And again, I'd also like to say just again, thank you for extending the invitation for the panel. Honored to be here. And yeah, I can really only further emphasize what Anna covered, which is that coordinated and authentic behavior is kind of one of the more widespread tactics we're observing as civil society in the online space. Again, because the impact that elections have over the lives of citizens is huge, and yet the cost of flooding the zone with disinformation, amplifying narratives inauthentically is incredibly low. So with such a minor barrier for entry, it really makes sense that both actors, domestic and foreign, are really capitalizing on limited attention spans, low voter trust, poor platform moderation, and the gamification of algorithms to eclipse authentic communication and information on these platforms. So we've observed that such methods are not being used just in Central Europe, but also worldwide. And this can manifest in a variety of tactics. One primary tactic, for example, that we've identified in some of our reporting is what we term murky accounts, which are social media profiles. Most notably, we've identified them on TikTok that have questionable affiliations and present themselves as official government, politician, or party accounts when in fact they're not. And so these accounts attempt to promote or amplify or even advertise political content, which is usually restricted by TikTok, for example. So, for example, on TikTok, content posted by verified politician, government, or party accounts, they face several restrictions, such as like a lack of monetization and reduced ability for advertising and fundraising. But these limits don't apply for these undeclared murky accounts. There's nothing that's stopping anyone from just creating an account, putting their profile as the same as official politicians, and just kind of running with that. And as a result, anyone can easily promote political content posing as one of these official party figures. So, for example, in the 5 weeks we did monitoring ahead of the May 2025 Romanian presidential elections, we identified over 300 murky accounts impersonating candidates and political parties, often continuing to impersonate the banned candidate Georgescu. And those were often some of the most active profiles that we observed, and they would often just spam the same types of videos over and over and over, hoping that the algorithm would eventually take one and pick it up and promote it into other people's feeds. And so while affiliation can often be very difficult to prove, we kind of have observed a lot of these murky accounts supporting candidates and parties across the political spectrum, but we have seen a trend in both Germany, Poland, and Romania of them often supporting far-right or fringe candidates. In Germany, we observed that the AfD observed the most report from some of these suspicious accounts in the run-up to Germany's federal elections last year. And then in Poland, it was the Confederation Party. So yeah, definitely I would just say, again, all I would add is that coordinated authentic behavior, and the murky accounts is just one aspect. There are so many different tactics, and it can vary on the platform because disinformation actors, foreign and domestic, are fully taking advantage of low platform moderation and the fact that, again, algorithms can be gamed and that voters already have low trust and limited attention spans. And often the battle for voter attention is just as important a dimension as the battle for, canvassing and campaigning in traditional senses in the modern day. So it's a real crucial dimension, and yet the cost of entry of interfering and eclipsing information on the online space is just so low. So it makes sense that we're seeing it just across country contexts.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to continue our conversation along this line and ask to what extent do you think that these techniques might change the results of the election? So, in other words, what is the stake here? So, okay, there are manipulation, but can they change substantially the election outcome? Is there any research or analysis for that? And because of the relatively limited time, I would like to ask another question as well, which is about already the Russian disinformation and the Russian interference into the public life of these countries. And I would like you to explain to the audience how shall we imagine this kind of Russian interference in your context, in your country, how the Russian authoritarian power interferes through which kind of techniques and methods interferes into your elections. So I think the two questions are interlinked somehow. But if not, you can answer it one by one. I don't know who would like to start. Yes, Duncan.
Yeah, I can just say that, again, to the degree that it's possible to measure the effect of coordinated and authentic behavior and how it actually changes voter behavior or actually boosts certain candidates, it's easy to measure the boost of candidates in the online space. It's difficult to see how well that translates into actual votes at the ballot box. And so one of the things that I think we need to take into account with the impact of just flooding the zone with disinformation is that often the promotion of the candidates is a secondary goal. Often a lot of just the overall flooding of the zone with disinformation is mostly just focused on reducing overall voter trust in just any information at all. This is a primary tactic that is, especially with the rise of generative AI and the use of deep fakes all over the place and the lower barrier for entry for anyone creating a really convincing deep fake of any sort of politician or creating a voice clone of any sort of politician. Again, just creating an overall distrust in your average voter on what they see online relating to the election. This can result in voter apathy and may actually result in voters just not engaging in politics at all because it's too difficult to follow, because there's just too many scandals, because it's just very, very complicated. And so, again, this can often be a primary or secondary impact of flooding the zone with disinformation, which can be done through coordinated and authentic behavior. It's just reducing overall voter trust in what they see online and even engaging in politics whatsoever. And so if it's in the benefit of one party to do that, to suppress votes, then so be it. But also in general, it's just this is advantageous for disinformation actors overall. And whether or not this is Russia or whether or not this is just domestic actors, I think often we focus on the foreign dimension with Russia as well, because of course Russia has large interest in the outcomes of a lot of these elections, but also so do many domestic actors. And sometimes this is not even for political agendas, but often a lot of the disinformation actors sometimes spread it just purely for financial gain, because a lot of the platforms incentivize spreading content that's highly emotional or gets people very much to react to something. And so there can be financial incentives for people to spread disinformation. There can be ideological incentives, or there can just be, again, purely nihilistic incentives of people just, again, trolling. So ultimately, the effect is the same, however, which is that it overall reduces voter trust in the information that they perceive. And that's a real problem for elections.
Thank you very much. Before we move on, I would like to remind the audience that you can ask questions and make comments in the chat window. The chat window is open for your comments and questions. Okay, so now we go on, and Peter would like to contribute.
Yes, thank you. And just very briefly, I think one reason why in Hungary coordinated inauthentic behavior was less of primary significance in the disinformation campaign so far, and that's why I did not mention it to your first question, was that Hungary was the champion of political advertisement and advertised disinformation before the 2024 European parliamentary elections. Only on Facebook there was the most advertisements put on Facebook by Hungary, more than from any other EU member state. So Hungary was the champion, and Fidesz was the champion of advertised disinformation. So they rather use this top-down model of disinformation. We spread the messages, and the recipients just get them. But right now, that since the autumn, on Google and Facebook officially, at least, do not accept political advertisements. Of course, miraculously, on both channels, some political advertisements still slip through their filters, but they can advertise less, so they can rely less on this carpet bombing model than they used before. And at that moment, coordinated inauthentic behavior, murky profile, as it was mentioned, and the trolls and bots on the social media space can be rather helpful. And on the one hand, the government builds up its own activist army on the social media, but on the other hand, it seems also to capitalize on the presence of pro-Russian inauthentic profiles and a large number of them. And I would just like to remind the audience that, at the moment it seems that Russian interference has stepped into a new phase in Hungary, because as it was uncovered by investigative journalists, Social Design Agency, a group that has been quite instrumental in previous interference campaigns as well, made a contract with the Hungarian government, and they practically their task is mainly to help the government in the last phase of the campaign through boosting Orbán's popularity, attacking the opponents, and also shape the international environment, and all that in a way of plausible deniability. Of course, the government denied any kind of presence and also a contract with Russian political operatives. But at the same time, it seems that there has been a few tactics that have never been used in the Hungarian campaign, and I would just like to mention the bizarre case of capturing a Ukrainian van that was bringing money and gold from Austria to Ukraine through a highly mediatized action. And this is something that is absolutely unprecedented in Hungary. And also this case was followed by quite a lot of deep fakes and also fake media content that seems to be created and also prompted in Russia. So the model seems to be in Hungary increasingly is that the content is prepared in Russia or by Russian experts, and it's disseminated by Hungarian actors who have their own audience, politicians, influencers, and so on. And just one last remark, I mean, and also pointing back on what Anna have just mentioned, I think it's quite interesting that the same tactics have been used in Moldova, that have been used in Romania before with limited success. And the same methods are being used in Hungary at the very moment. And this is, I think, where we have some good news. So Russian spin doctors are just as spin doctors anywhere else in the world, just want to maximize their profit while, investing the minimal effort possible. And it seems that there is just a copy-paste here. And so far, I do not really feel that it would really bring a quality change into the campaign. And the mere fact that Russia interferes into an election is far from being a recipe for success. And we have seen it in other countries as well. And just to remind us that there was a so-called doppelganger scandal that was also a Russian information operation all over Europe. And even after it was uncovered, the agency that was running that campaign still wanted to get their funds from the Russian Federation, and they just argued that Guardian has written about the campaign because it was uncovered. So it just shows how successful it was. So I think that we can rely a bit on that kind of cynicism of the campaign strategies, that they not just want to deceive the recipients, the target audiences, but also they want to deceive the ones who give the money for them and overestimate the impact of their work.
Thank you very much. So a small good news in this mess is that they want to repeat what was not so successful previously, as you said. But otherwise, as you also said, it's really, really very severe, the situation of the Russian interference in Hungary. So it's a commonplace by now that the Orbán regime has become a kind of Trojan horse in the European Union of Russia. I am wondering from the colleagues from Slovakia and Romania, from Anna and Jan, whether the situation what you perceive is as severe, or what are the similarities and what is the difference, or what might be the difference between the Hungarian case and your cases?
Yes, I can continue. Firstly, I would like to answer to the question of whether this disinformation campaigns are actually working to influence the elections and to manipulate the voters. I think something that it's often forgot by the Romanian population, by the Romanian authorities, but in general by also the international actors, is that those voters are actually going as individuals to the voting stations to vote. Of course, we're talking about disinformation campaigns, but as the final decision, you have a citizen going and doing his right to vote for a candidate. And in all the situation that we had with Călin Georgescu, of course, we know officially that we had a very mass campaign on disinformation and manipulating the voters. But of course, you cannot have a direct link that you have, is this hypothesis that TikTok managed to give us a candidate in the second round of the presidential elections. I think it's very dangerous to see the situation at the surface level, because in general, when we are talking about the Romanian elections, the journalists, everyone wants to hear about the foreign interference that we had in the elections, because it sounds very, attractive to have the sophisticated methods of the Russian disinformators manipulating the elections. But the situation is more nuanced, and I want you to support what Peter said about the importance of domestical actors that are actually channeling the messages of Russian disinformation. When it comes to Romania, I think the last 2 to 3 years, or at least since the start of the war in Ukraine, I think it was the first time in the Romanian society that people realized that even though we want to promote ourselves as a Russophobic society, because the history, of course, taught us that we need to hate the Russian and that they are not our friends. I think we ignored due to this I don't know, narrative about being Russophobic or about not being vulnerable to Russian disinformation, that we ignored how Russian disinformation actually works. In 90% of the situation, you don't have a Russian disinformation actors just saying directly to you that I'm here to do disinformation. Of course, it's working, and that's why it worked that well in the Călin Georgescu campaign, was that those narratives were actually targeting social economical aspects that the Romanian population was frustrated about. The whole discourse in the Călin Georgescu's campaign and the presidential election was about the anti-establishment sentiment, about trying to push out the mainstream parties that are not representing the true Romanian population. So I think it's very important to do those nuances when we're talking about the Russian disinformation, which of course also exists in Romania. It's I think it's a plate with a lot of flavors. First of all, what we discovered in the presidential elections and also in the Moldovan elections is that they're using platform exploitation to echo their messages. Of course, you have the traditional recipe of having Telegram groups in which a number of domestical actors are trained to channel the messages on TikTok, on Instagram, on Facebook through those coordinated pages. We're also talking about infrastructure level. The Pravda network worked very well in Romanian elections as well. Not necessarily Pravda websites with the translated disinformation from Russia channel, but promoting Călin Georgescu through those Pravda network in social media platforms. But yes, I think here it's important to state that Russian disinformation is not working in the electoral year. I think actually in the electoral year is quite obvious when we're interacting with this type of disinformation. In Romania, we had hundreds and hundreds of flagged incidents by funky citizens in which you had bots directly with a name on Russian, directly commenting in Russian. So what we're seeing in the electoral year is that it's just floating and floating and floating. Any strategy that can at least influence a little bit the chaos in the electoral space, but in general, we're talking about years and years of influencing. Again, directly linked with the social economical factors that voters need to hear on those echo chambers.
Thank you very much. Before I hand over to Jan, Peter flagged that he would have a reflection.
Yeah, just a very quick one, and thanks, Anna, for mentioning that in the Romanian society, was seen to be much more resilient than really is, and it's the same thing with Hungary. And I'm a social psychologist, not a historian, so I generally think that history matters less in terms of shaping the receptivity of the public opinion towards certain narratives. And these days we sometimes see that pro-Russian narratives sell similarly well in Romania or Hungary. I mean, two countries that historically should be much more resilient to these kind of narratives than, for example, Slovakia or Bulgaria, where you have more historic and cultural ties. So I think Russian disinformation can be quite successful even in countries where history would suggest otherwise.
Thank you. And Jan, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I must follow on that because I think Slovakia has quite good reasons as well to be skeptical of Russian influence, and just think of the last century and their influence and the outcome that we have here. But that's a totally different topic. I completely agree with what was said. I just want to say that I'm not an expert on social media, so I will not go into this debate very further in Slovak environment, because I can tell only from the analysis of other people that were made on this, and the outcome that I can see in my perspective, which is not an expert perception. So I would like to stick with what TI Slovakia does, and that's the impact on the of the disinformation on the election campaigns. And we could see that in the last 2 or 3 campaigns, rather in a high amount, because quite rapidly. Because what Duncan said, I completely understand. I completely agree with that. That there are several ways or several goals that you want to achieve, and one of the main goals is that you spread so much distrust that people won't just come and won't participate on the elections. And if you are, for instance, a coalition member party, in Slovakia, the dominant one, so you have a highly you have a core voters that they will participate, and if you lower the participation of the others that are not yet decided, what the outcome is that you gain more from the pie at the end. So I think this is one of the very huge successes of the disinformation and the spread of the mistrust into what, for instance, mainstream media say, what the opposition say. So if you have any scandals, if you have corruption scandals, etc., you just need to lower the trust in all the others, and afterwards you can just use the argumentum ad hominem. So you say that, look at who is saying that, just don't believe him, and whatever you do, it just doesn't matter anymore. So from my perspective, this is the highest outcome and the most problematic one, because if you just flood the environment with such a huge amount of hatred and you try to separate people in a groups that don't trust each other anymore, that's not just influencing the environment, election environment, but it influences the society as a whole.
Thank you very much. I think as a last round, because the time is flying, and we shall have also a short session for 2 questions in Mentimeters. So we would like to ask the audience to vote along 2 simple questions about the topic. But before that, I would like to ask, based on what you have just said, that what can or should be done in this situation. So how can we counter successfully or anyhow the Russian disinformation? Already Peter and others have already mentioned the resilience, how to increase the resilience of the society, and in general, what can be done in this situation, both on behalf of experts, analysts, think tanks, NGOs, and on the other hand, on behalf of the population. So what would you advise to the audience, how to relate to this kind of very, very miserable situation of the Russian disinformation? Perhaps now I would like to start with Duncan, because they started a lawsuit against X. This is a relatively new issue, and the topic of the lawsuit or the theme of the lawsuit is to access some important data and information in connection with the upcoming Hungarian elections, and the X denied that, and your organization, Democracy Reporting International, then sued this platform. So could you please briefly describe the case, and what do you expect as an outcome?
Sure, and I'll try to speak a little louder because I saw a comment that I'm coming off as a bit quiet. Right, so one of the biggest challenges of tracking these disinformation campaigns and coordinated and authentic behavior is that often you need large volumes of data to say with any confidence that what you're observing is genuinely suspicious. So one account, for example, reposting like a Russian propaganda website, that could be innocuous, but 100 accounts consistently sharing the same content over and over and over on a consistent basis, that is a story. So identifying these patterns manually is often impossible, if not extremely tedious, which is why we need access to platform data. And this is something that you can do through the back end of online media platforms through their APIs. And this is something that used to be very open source. So fortunately, this kind of access is guaranteed under the EU law. So the Digital Services Act, specifically Article 40 of the Digital Services Act, obliges platforms to provide data to organizations investigating systemic risks like disinformation and coordinated inauthentic behavior. So the DSA also additionally carves out a role for civil society organizations, precisely because they're well positioned to detect and publicize systemic risks quickly. So what we did was we applied for access through the already established mechanisms on X to receive access to X's API to be able to monitor for inauthentic behavior and disinformation on the platform. So doing social media monitoring. This is something that you can do through Meta on the Meta Content Library and other platforms as well. But X did not respond to our initial inquiry, and then they rejected our application. And then we pursued legal action, and we ultimately ended up winning the lawsuit and gaining access to X's API to be able to conduct systemic research on the platform. So again, what our case really shows is that when platforms fail to meet their obligations, legal avenues exist, and that courts can and will enforce organizations' rights to be able to monitor for systemic risks around elections. And this legal success really matters, again, beyond our work, because we're in a moment where platforms are rolling back their moderation efforts and pulling back from the commitments they made often around election integrity. And as that happens, our responsibility for identifying and flagging systemic risks is increasingly falling on civil society. So our case, we kind of hope that it sets a precedent for other researchers and organizations who are equally entitled to access under the DSA to sort of assert their own rights as well. So the legal infrastructure is there. And again, what our case did is essentially just establish that it actually works in practice. And that countering disinformation requires a layered approach, both robust methodologies for detecting manipulation and coordinated authentic behavior, but also using legal tools to compel access when platforms resist. And that civil society is indeed empowered and has the resources to do this continuously, not just around elections, but also across the full information environment when, again, these systemic risks are present. Coordinated inauthentic behavior is happening, often around elections, and we need to be able to access data to show where these abuses are happening at scale, and then to be able to report them to the appropriate authorities when we see them. So again, having access to data is a huge legal win, and we hope that it can set a precedent going forward in the future for other organizations.
Thank you very much. Who would like to continue?
I think I can continue.
Yeah, okay.
Sure. Okay. I'll be very briefly then. Totally support what Duncan said. I will add also institutional capacity when it comes to monitoring this information. I don't know if you know this, but 1 year and a half passed since the cancellation of elections in Romania, and we still don't have a final report on what happened, whether it was Russian interference, whether it was domestic manipulation. So I think at least in the case of Romania is to try and to build the capacity for the institution to have more of a proactive approach to this information that rather than being reactive. For right now, us at Funky Citizens, we started doing trainings, workshops with the DSA coordinator in Romania, with all the institutions that are involved in this process, because we realized that in the times of elections, it was only the civil society society and independent journalists that did reports and documented real-time the spread of disinformation on the platforms. I will add here the second one, being on sustaining independent real-time monitoring infrastructure in monitoring disinformation that needs to be built before the crisis. In the time of elections, we were involved through the Code of Conduct on Disinformation. In the rapid response system, we collaborated with the social media platforms. Of course, the response is questionable about what the social media platforms did about the flagged content, but I think we have this we have this approach of being very reactive in the electoral year, but we need to understand that the infrastructure that the disinformators are creating, that is creating for quite some years ahead of the elections, such as was in the case of Romanian elections, in which the accounts that spread disinformation were created 5 years, 6 years, 7 years ago. Of course, at Funky, we also believe in other stuff besides advocacy and monitoring, and we have a strong network of offline touch with the society. In the electoral years, we went at the grassroots. We talked with over 30,000 people. I think this part of media literacy, explaining to the regular citizens what the SA is, what kind of infrastructure we have on protecting the voters, I think it's very important. So in general, I would say a whole society approach will be at this point, with the resources that we have, a step ahead to counter disinformation.
Thank you very much. Peter?
Yeah, two lines of responses very quickly. First of all, I think the general counter-disinformation strategy that is partially the semi-official, let's say, strategy of the European Commission and of the European Digital Media Observatory. Political Capital is leading the Hungarian Digital Media Observatory, which is a part of this network. So it's a threefold strategy, which is based on research, uncovering the disinformation activities, fact-checking, so debunking the content, and media literacy, which taps into this societal approach that Anna have just referred to. When it comes to more specifically Russian disinformation, I think I typically mention a 4R strategy. First of all, reveal. So reveal what is happening and what are the shady practices that are used by Russian disinformation. And just to mention one Hungarian case, there was a literal false flag operation on a weekend march in Hungary when most probably Russian citizens, or we don't know exactly whom, but just ran into the opposition rally and very quickly stretched a huge Ukrainian flag so that the pro-governmental media could make a photo on this Ukrainian flag and then claiming that, look, this is what the opposition represents in Hungary. It's like not a Hungarian interest, but Ukrainian interest. So it was immediately revealed that it was not a genuine, not a grassroots activity, but something that was staged. Then react. So the best thing is to react as soon as possible, both by diplomatic actors, political actors, and both by civil society actors. And it has also happened in that case. Third, I would say ridicule. So take away the scary appeal of disinformation by showing how amateurish it could be in a few cases, as it happened in Hungary, for example. And as a result of that, this false flag, literal false flag operation was uncovered, at all the politicians that have posted about this Ukrainian flag, proving that the opposition is pro-Ukrainian in Hungary, if you take a look at the comments after this post, it's only about that, look, it has been published, that it's fake. So why are you releasing fake content? So you can take away the, I think, the impact this way. And the fourth R would be something that I think is mostly the task of the platforms, that they usually just do in a highly imperfect way, remove. So remove inauthentic profiles. It's very easy to identify inauthentic profiles for us researchers as well. Why is it so difficult for Facebook and other platforms to remove these profiles that obviously go against their policies, and also remove content that and advertisements, for example, that are again obviously goes against platform policies, because this is also something that is imperfect to say the least, but I don't think it's I think arguing that any kind of removal of content or removal of inauthentic profiles, if they are obviously fake and go against platform policies, is some kind of Orwellian censorship, I think is simply ridiculous. And mostly these contents and these accounts are used to suppress free speech and not to support free speech.
Thank you very much. Jan?
Yes, I agree that plenty of things which are valid have been said already. It's about contradiction between freedom of speech and regulation, effective regulation. I completely agree with this, but so I would say that there are two separate ways have to look at the situation. The first is a short-term goal, so we can do all this revealing and informing citizens, etc., which is really crucial. Nowadays. But I think if we want to contradict the disinformation or build a safety situation in our countries, it's connected with economy and education. If we have the situation that 30% of Slovaks, or even there were polls saying that even 60% of Slovak believe in disinformation, that's something which is really crucial and problematic. So education is absolutely the first step to do. But afterwards, if 1/3 of young people aged 18 level or something like that go studying abroad and never return back home, it's education of people that won't be here deciding of the future. So what's the problem? It's mostly connected with the economy, which is not that easy to change, obviously. But it's really connected also with type of disinformation that can be rather easily spread. For instance, the Russian influence through gas, etc., it's connecting the majority of countries in our region. But if you are economically weak and you can see that such a change impacts half of the citizens within a high number of percentage of their income. So it means that you can be successful even if the people know that there is some shady business behind what these politicians say. So it's a huge topic and a huge run in front of us for not just the next short-term period, but the long-term period as well, I would say.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, the time is flying, so we will need to wrap up soon. But I would like the audience to answer a Mentimeter question, which will be just one this time. No, just one, because we don't have time. So it could be the first one, and it will be soon open in your screen as well. And it's about what word comes to your mind when you think about election disinformation in your country. So you need to write a word which you think is the most associated with disinformation in your country. And then I would like to ask the panelists to reflect to it very briefly, and we then make a final round, and unfortunately we need to wrap up then. So it's a so-called, it will be a so-called word cloud, and the bigger is, the bigger are the letters, the most the these expressions are mentioned. So far, propaganda and money are mentioned the most. We shall wait 1 minute more. In the meantime, I would like to ask the panelists as in the final round not only to reflect what we can see here, but also to answer my hypothetical question, which will be the last one. And it will be about how this situation on disinformation and election manipulation will change in 5 years. So if you project your thoughts in 5 years, what do you think will be the situation? The situation will be worse, even worse than now, or it will be slightly better, and why? Okay, so that would be the final round, and obviously you can add anything else which you wanted to say, but there was no time for that. Okay, so I think it's clear that our biggest enemy in terms of disinformation is the propaganda. So propaganda is mentioned the most, and also political propaganda. Well, propaganda is usually political, I think. So I think these two mentions can be added as well. And also, obviously, money, because it's also about huge money. So it's not only about election manipulation, but also they manipulate the elections to be in power and to enrich themselves. So cementing the power and enrichment, they always go hand in hand. Okay, so thank you very much for your contribution. I'm very sorry, but I don't think we have the time for the second question in Mentimeter, although I would like to ask this final round. So if you want, you can reflect to the Mentimeter question, and also please give briefly some reflections on this hypothetical question. What do you think the state of disinformation and or Russian propaganda will be in 5 years? Will it worsen, or will it slightly improve, or not slightly? Okay, so who would like to start?
Okay.
Okay.
I'm happy to say just very few words. First of all, I think we are struggling also to project the results of the election that is going to happen in 1 month in Hungary. So I would not dare to predict what is going to happen in 5 years. I'm not an alarmist generally, so I think that there is I mean, we are in quite a bad situation already when it comes to disinformation, and for me, it's a bit striking how much, I mean, that there would be quite a lot of tools, political, technological, and also social, to counter these tendencies, but it seems that there is, I think it's a supply-driven market where the political consultants and the political parties themselves feel that there is a huge demand for disinformation, and they have to learn by some elections that it's not an omnipotent tool. If they learn it by the elections, I know it's a bit of tautological explanation, so if the voters will not fall to disinformation in a few elections in a row, then maybe this belief that disinformation can be omnipotent will be less important among spin doctors, and maybe it will reduce its impact. And when it comes to the word cloud, I will not play by the rules, because I will pick up a small word only, Ukraine. I think the interesting aspect of the Hungarian campaign at the moment by the governmental side, that it just repeats one message, that Ukraine is threatening Hungary, in an environment that, if you take a look at the polls or the problem map of the voters, Ukraine is far from being the most important thing. So Hungarians are most interested in bread and butter issues, economy, living standards, corruption, healthcare, but not in foreign policy issues. So it's again a huge stress test for this informational autocracy at home.
Thank you very much, Peter. So who would like to continue? Anna, perhaps?
Yeah, okay, sorry.
Oh, yeah, Jan, sorry.
Sorry, just a quick remark. I completely agree with this line of thought, because if we look at the issues that were mentioned, it's the biggest one was obviously propaganda, but all the others, it was a list of some kind of enemies. So and this is what the disinformation nowadays serve for from my perspective, to find some enemy. It's not just Ukraine; it could be pandemic regime and supporters of some pandemic restrictions. It could be support of USA. It could be support of whatever. But you find some, or it could be just your political opponent, and you spread disinformation on him. So the aim of the disinformation currently is mostly to find an enemy that you can fight against, and it might be some problem which is totally made up. It's not a problem that covers the most highly influential issues of the people in the country, but it's not stupid when it works, as it said. So and nowadays, from my perspective, this is the main problem, and I think that in 5 years the situation might be the same, with different tools concerning the AI development and so on.
Thank you. Anna?
Very briefly, firstly, I will look totally at Moldova. I think what they witnessed in the last 10, 15, 20 years when it comes to Russian disinformation and in general election interference should be a lesson for all of us. For us, in 1 year and a half, we were we woke up in a country that we didn't recognize. We didn't know what happened with Călin Georgescu. We didn't have institutional capacity. ANCOM, which is the institution that the coordinator of DSA, was totally overwhelmed with the situation. And I think our last optimistical side of the situation was to look at Moldovians and to see, okay, they passed this river before. Let's see what we can learn from that experience. And I think Moldova entering in the EU, possibly Ukraine entering in the EU, should be also something that we need to consider about how the disinformation landscape in the region will look after. Besides that, I think, which is already happening, and I'm supporting Jan, that we will see much of the same. Our concern is about the concept of shared reality. Right now, not only Romania, but in general, we don't have a consensus of what democracy is or what are the values that are, I don't know, bringing us together at the conversational level, at the institutional level, at every level that a democratic society should work on. So from my personal view, I think this part of trying to reconstruct a shared reality should be one top priority for the next 5 years.
Thank you. And last but not least, Duncan.
Yeah, I agree. It's very difficult to predict what the next 5 years will hold, but I can only ever echo what Anna mentioned about the sort of erosion of any sort of shared reality being one of the, I think, probably the greatest threats to democratic discourse or just democratic health and integrity for the next few years. The demand for disinformation is always going to be there. In fact, perhaps we shouldn't even understand disinformation as information that's attempting to change people's perspectives, but instead, disinformation is sort of a mechanism through which people are allowed to maintain their beliefs in the face of evidence to the contrary. So again, just reinforcing people's inherent biases, reinforcing people's inherent fears or suspicions. This is something that I think, disinformation poses the greatest challenge for, simply because in an age of social media algorithms, no two people are seeing the same type of information. No two people's algorithms on TikTok, on X, on Instagram are the same. And when you have algorithms that encourage people to interact with the types of content that the algorithm has personally chosen that they will interact with, what you have is this sort of siloing of everybody's own world and reality. And so not only do you have a fracturing of reality across political spectrums, but across individuals. This is my big fear for what the future may hold. And again, this is only made worse by the advent of generative AI and the ability of, us now being presented with visual media on the internet that is hard for our own naked eyes to be able to verify. And so I think perhaps a pathway forward to a more hopeful future is through robust regulation of social media platforms. We can enforce stricter rules against disinformation and against the monitoring of these sorts of coordinated and authentic behavior. We can have ways of verifying information, whether it's through watermarking of generative AI or through the promotion of actual trusted sources. And again, I think we can actually control algorithms, and regulations like the DSA provide pathways through which this can be done. However, these regulations and these laws are still very much in their infancy. So it is, I think, our responsibility as civil society to really be pushing for them to actually come out into helping the public good. And again, I think the battle for information integrity on social media is, I think, one of the most important of our time. And I think that will determine what the space looks like in 5 years.
Okay, thank you very much, Duncan. Let it be the last word. We had, I think, 2 questions. One question was addressed by Peter. It was about the protocol of the European Union on countering disinformation. And the other question, unfortunately, we do not have time because we really need to finish right now the session. So I would like to ask, I would like to thank very much our participants of the current session, Anna, Jan, Duncan, and Peter, and we really appreciate that you shared concrete insights about the topic and said your opinion. And I am sure this is a long battle to counter disinformation in the election campaigns and election manipulation and beyond that as well. So in some way or another, we will be all part of this this battle, you as panelists and also the audience as well. So thank you very much again. And we shall have a break now, and we shall continue the conference at 2:30 p.m. And yes, one thing, my colleague reminds me that we would like kindly ask the audience to fill out the survey, which is also put into the link, into the chat window as a link, and you find the necessary information to fill out the survey. So before you fill out, you have to put some necessary information, such as, for example, the project number. Sorry for this bureaucratic exercise, but it can be done only this way. So we would really appreciate if you can give us a feedback on this survey. So thank you very much again, and see you in slightly less than 40 minutes. Thank you.